Hey, so I just have a message for my younger men out there. If you're a young man, a single man on this channel, then this message is for you. You much rather be alone than to spend your time with the wrong woman. You much rather be alone than to spend your time, with the wrong crowd of individuals. You much rather spend that time alone. So you can build your foundation with the Most High. You can find out what your purpose is in life and grow in the Word. Grow in accountability. Grow in the Most High and acquire as much wisdom as you can. Who's heard of that saying out there, I'm looking for my better half, or, she's my better half? Well, a mindset shift that, needs to happen is that you are not a half. You are a whole. When you begin to realize this, what happens is you begin to take your path in life, your purpose, very, very seriously, which is a blessing. You take these things very seriously and value them with the utmost importance, because once you figure out your purpose in life, you can then become a sacrifice, and a selfless individual that, knows his talents, knows his unique abilities that he has, and ultimately now can become a sacrifice, just like the Son of Man was a sacrifice. You can sacrifice yourself through the abilities and skill sets that you have. So working these things out and having a foundation there is of the utmost importance. Because sometimes we can be scared to tackle life alone. We can be scared to go at it alone, and I totally get it. I totally understand. I get it, but you would much rather be alone than with the wrong woman, ending up, with the wrong woman. Ultimately these things can have a disastrous impact on us, if we make the wrong decisions, especially when we're younger and, we are looking for a woman to fulfill ourselves, because, we might not have that fulfillment within us to begin with, which a lot of us, can be guilty of, What can happen is that will then have an impact on us the rest of our life, You would trust that the Most High has placed a woman into your life, obviously on his own, according to his destiny and his plan that he has for you. Because if the Most High, has not placed that woman on our path, then, ultimately this can, become a stumbling block, And so these things are of the utmost importance. So you are not a half, you are a whole. And when we look for fulfillment in others, we look for fulfillment in we're looking for our other half, because we're not a whole, we're a half. This can lead to destructive tendencies. This can lead to, us making brash decisions, rushing into getting into relationships. And ultimately, what happens when this happens is, the decisions that we make aren't necessarily the right decisions, and we can be guilty of these things because, sometimes we might be scared to go at it alone. Sometimes we might be scared to tackle life alone, But I'm here to tell you that there's absolutely no need to rush these things at all. There's no need to rush these things at all. From a male's perspective, a male's biological clock is much different in comparison to a woman's biological clock. Now, I mean this with the utmost respect for our beloved sisters out there, but our biological clock looks much different in comparison to a woman's. Now, obviously with women, they have the amazing gift to be able to bring forth life, bring forth children. And you see us men, we don't have that capability. We don't have that gift that the Most High has blessed us with. So for us men, our biological clock, is a little bit different to women. And you see, this is why I really have to emphasize that there honestly is no rush. There's no rush at all. There's no need to rush a relationship. There's no need to make any brash decisions, all for the sake of you wanting to, not be alone. I'm reading a book at the moment. It's called The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. Beautiful book. Beautiful book. The Testament of the 12 Patriarchs is about the 12 sons of Jacob. And the 12 sons of Jacob, they, Levi, Issachar, Judah, they all left their testimonies before they passed away. So there's some profound wisdom in this book. As a matter of fact, a brother of mine come to stay with me a couple of years ago, and brother shed some tears to this book, man. He shed some tears. There's some profound wisdom in this book. I believe he was reading the book of Joseph, if I'm correct. So the brother shed some tears with this book. It's anybody who has read the Bible, and I highly recommend checking out the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. They got some profound wisdom in there. But anyway, I was reading the book of Issachar, I think last week, and the Most High placed a woman on Issachar's path when Issachar was 35 years old. And by the sounds of it, in this book, Issachar was 35 years old, and he wasn't necessarily even looking for a woman. By the sounds of it in this book, the Most High just basically placed her on his path. So the Most High, at his appointed time, placed her on his path to be, his wife, to be his helpmeet. And you see, the Most High knows what we need. We know what we want, right? But you see, the Most High knows what we need. To be able to shoulder a woman through spiritual warfare, to be able to, provide enough, wisdom, because wisdom comes through, spiritual maturity. It comes with experiences and it comes with age. When you have these things as a man, it's important to be confident in what you bring to the table, especially in this day and age where they are teaching men, not to be confident of these things. They're teaching us to be less of a man than what we should be. And everybody's drinking the Kool-Aid at some point. I myself am guilty for drinking the Kool-Aid. We've all drank the Kool-Aid. These Luciferian agendas, none of us are exempt to these Luciferian agendas. And, it's almost like you have to make a conscious effort to actually snap out of them. But, be confident in the skill set that you have, that you can bring to the table. Don't rush into anything because you don't want to be alone. Grow in wisdom, acquire. Focus on acquiring as much wisdom as you can. Focus on being a warrior spiritually in the spiritual realm, to be able to shoulder and lead a relationship through spiritual warfare. These are the things of the utmost importance. It says in the book of Proverbs, you're better off dwelling in the wilderness than to strive with a contentious woman. So you want to be making sure that you pick the woman who is the right fit for you. And ultimately, you are not making that decision. That decision is coming from the Most High. He has the right woman, for you. But to be in a relationship with somebody who, isn't your fit, or they might not value what you bring to the table, they might not value or respect you as an individual. personally, I know I would much rather be alone for the rest of my life. Finding a woman who, seeks to please you, who respects you, and most importantly, seeks to please the Most High first and foremost. But being the man that she wants to respect, being the man that she wants to please, you also have to be that man. It goes both ways. But men, there's no rush. No rush at all. Focus on building your foundation as a man. Focus on acquiring as much wisdom from your mistakes and growing in accountability as much as you can. Growing in the Most High so He can shape you in the character of His Son. These things are of the utmost importance. And when you figure out your purpose, why you're here, and the unique talents and skill sets and abilities that the Most High has blessed you with, because this walk is not a one-size-fits-all. We all have different experiences through the oracles that we've all been given in life. And your skill sets might be different in comparison to the brother who's, maybe standing next to you. So figuring out these things and what it is, through your experiences in life that you can now bring to the table to, live out your purpose in which the Most High has called you, and ultimately so you can become a sacrifice and a selfless individual, and be that sacrifice just like, the Son of Man, to be able to sacrifice your experiences and your, whatever it is, to be able to help other people, But honestly, there's no need to rush these things. Trust me, there's no need to rush. You're better off spending that time alone, than to be rushed into a relationship, than to go looking for, fulfillment. Remember, you are not a half, you are a whole. And when you meet the right woman that can, you complement her life, she complements your life, and then the two flesh become one flesh. Isn't that a blessing? When you complement each other and the two become one, then that just adds to your fulfillment, right? It doesn't make you fulfilled when you are trying to still seek your other half. Right, so I pray that this message is able to bless you. And, I love you all. See you in the next video.